early childhood educator and trainer. It's my privilege today to be talking with three educators representing family daycare, long daycare and preschools from different parts of Australia about how they document, assess and plan for children's learning. None of these educators profess to be experts or to have all the answers, but they very kindly agreed to share what they do so that other educators can see the range of different ways that educators can incorporate the early years learning framework and work towards meeting the requirements of the National Quality Standard. Here is Alison Bradshaw, a long daycare director from Victoria. Welcome, Alison. Thank you very much for being with us here today. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your setting.
Sure. Well, we're a small 27-place community cooperative that's managed by a volunteer parent committee. We care and educate children from 8 months through to 5 years. We run an indoor-outdoor program at the centre, and all of our children attend the co-op in a part-time capacity, so generally either 1, 2 or 3 days a week.
So Alison, I know that your service was part of an extended trial of the EYLF early in 2009, and I was wondering if you could tell us how your educators have, changed or reflected on the way they document since they've been engaging with the EYLF?
Absolutely. We've made quite a lot of changes to the way we document the children's learning over the past couple of years, and it's still an evolving journey. We're certainly not at the end of it. It's an ongoing process for us. In working with the early years learning framework, we've spent a lot of time reflecting and discussing the important things about what it is that we do with the children. What do we as educators see as being important to our role in how we work with children, and of course how we work with families and incorporate their values into our program, and of course the children's voice, and looking at how we then highlight that in our documentation. I guess we've used the framework really as a tool to guide this process, and it's been fantastic in motivating the staff to want to make the changes and to really look at the ways that we can work with families to best support children's learning and development.
Thank you. I wonder if you could talk with us now or share with us about how you gather information about children. We know that the EYLF is encouraging educators to collect information in a variety of ways, and I wondered if you could show us what you're actually doing.
Sure. Well, every staff member, our part-time and full-time staff, all contribute to our curriculum journey. And of course, with that, comes lots of various skills, experience and expertise. So for us, it's really important that we use a range of different methods of gathering information about children so that we can build a complete picture of each child. Our learning journal is our primary form of documentation, and in it this contains significant documentation using anecdotal observations, jottings, transcripts of conversations that we've had with children and families, as you can see, photos, learning stories, daily reflections, and then of course evaluations of all of the information that's gathered. So there's quite a range of different forms of information that's put into the journal, and then that's used to, we then analyse that and interpret the meaning behind what we've documented, and then we use that information in our future planning. We also keep portfolios which include very similar forms of information, but of course it's focused more on the individual child, whereas the learning journal is focused more from a group perspective.
Lovely. So Alison, could you tell us some of the things that the way you set up your portfolios, what sort of things do you include in individual children's documentation?
Sure. Well, it starts off by just giving families an introduction as to what the portfolio is and what the sorts of things they might find in the portfolio. So it's like a welcome letter, I guess you could say.
Yes.
Then we've also got a bit of an explanation as to what the Early Years Learning Framework is all about, and an outline of the learning outcomes, so that we can help parents get a better understanding of what all these codes and different things mean when they're seeing it in our learning journal. So we're really wanting them to share an understanding with us about why we do what we do,
yes.
so that when we're asking them for feedback and for their contribution, they've got an informed and better understanding of the early years learning framework and the importance that that has in terms of their children's learning. We include things like special events at the beginning of the year. We always have a welcome barbecue for our families, so that's important to show that the parent involvement, I guess. And children always love seeing photos of their families being within the centre. So again, important link to being. And then there's things such as just general observations, learning stories, interesting things that have happened on a day-to-day basis that we feel would be great to share with families. And it also helps to build that picture of the child so that we can better plan for them in the future.
So Alison, you have some beautiful documentation here on an individual child. Can you explain to us, how do you analyse or reflect on the distance travelled for that particular child from one time of the year to another, particularly in terms of tracking the child's progress towards the learning outcomes?
Sure. Well, a lot of our information the staff will reflect on a daily basis. So in our learning journal, they will look at our teaching strategies, look at what was working, what wasn't, and make comments in there. We will also talk about things that are emerging in terms of the children's learning. With the individual child, we felt that we needed something a little bit more that helps us monitor and track the children's progress in regard to the learning outcomes. So we've developed a learning and development summary, which has been fantastic in being able to show us the distance travelled in regard to how far children have come towards the outcomes. And it's also been great in that it's highlighted, it will help us to highlight gaps. So of course that then will in turn help us with planning for possible learning opportunities in the future.
And I guess the thing with the learning outcomes is that children will meet particular sub-outcomes or key components of those learning outcomes in different ways at different ages, won't they?
Absolutely.
So that at different parts of the year, their distance travelled will look different, won't it, under each of those outcomes?
Absolutely. And I guess we recognise that children come to us at varying stages in terms of their progression towards each of the outcomes. So it's really important that when we're looking at the documentation that we're collecting on children, that we keep that in mind.
So you're using a combination approach, aren't you, of deliberate, purposeful, intentional teaching as well as being responsive to children's interests and the things that they want to learn and do?
Absolutely. We are looking at guided learning, adult-led learning and child-directed learning. So we're trying to incorporate all of those things into our curriculum and obviously that will then open up the opportunities for children. If children feel empowered, that they can make decisions in their own environment about what they're involved in on a day-to-day perspective.
So can you tell us a little bit about, I know that your service has a lovely procedure that you use to encourage the child's voice. Would you be able to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, there's two main ways, I think. Firstly, in terms of our learning journal, when the staff sit down each day to write down some of the learning that's been happening, they get the children involved in that. So the children in both rooms, our younger room and our older room, might assist in helping choose the photos that they'd like to see go into the learning journal. And staff will also document conversations that they have with the children, perhaps about the photos themselves, what the children were doing in those photos. So that's a really lovely way of getting the children's voice into our curriculum. Another way which has been really well received is that our older children have the opportunity to participate in yoga sessions in the morning. So they go through a series of poses and then the session finishes with what we call candle time. And it's where a glass candle, the children sit in a circle and a glass candle is passed around to each child. And they sit there with the candle and show a great respect. And they talk about the program, what sorts of things they enjoy doing within the program. They talk about their friendships, who they might like to play with on the day, what sorts of things they might like to be involved in on the day, and then also what sorts of things they might like to see in future for the program. So it's a really lovely way of getting some really fantastic information back from the children about their day.
One last question. You've talked a lot today about the way your educators reflect on their own practice and think about the implications that has for children. What are some of the other ways that you're doing critical reflection in terms of really thinking about the ongoing learning?
Sure. As I said, critical reflection happens on a day-to-day basis, and we do document snippets throughout our journal about strategies that might have worked and may not have, and things that we might like to focus on to support children's learning in the future. But predominantly in terms of reflecting on our own practice, this is done for us through our staff meetings and our team meetings. So it's time where we really use the framework to look at our practice in comparison to the practices and principles within the framework, and reflect on what's working, what's not, and what's important in terms of our teaching. And we're constantly coming up with new ideas, implementing new things, reflecting and evaluating over time. And I think it's really important we see reflecting on our practices a process, I guess you could say, just like curriculum development is, that it's an ongoing thing, that we're never going to get to a point where we've got it, we've nailed it, that it's perfect, that it's something that we need to continually analyse.
Thank you so much, Alison. Is there anything that you'd like to say to other long day care educators who are also experimenting with the way they're documenting?
Certainly. I think first and foremost is that there's no one right way of developing curriculums for children and documenting their learning. Keep talking with your colleagues and other educators and families within the field and share ideas. As we all know, what works well for one service doesn't work necessarily in another. And I think that the framework has the flexibility to accommodate a range of different curriculum methods and documentation methods. So look at the early years learning framework as a positive influence in guiding the process and helping to keep you motivated and keep you on track for wanting to find better ways of how we can support the care and education of the children that we're caring for.
Thank you very much. We'd like to conclude, but thank you so much for being willing to share your procedures and documentation with other educators, and would you pass on our thanks to your educators for being willing to share their work and to the families for sharing the photographs of their beautiful children.
Sure. Thanks, Heather.
These three segments have been designed to demonstrate that there's not just one way to plan that can incorporate the EYLF or meet the requirements of the National Quality Standard. Each of these educators is using a process that works for them and their children and families, their settings and their contexts. Educators are encouraged to fine-tune their current methods so that they will meet the standards and elements of the National Quality Standard. Being guided by the approved learning framework in the way that you work with children, as well as in the way that you document their learning, will mean that you're well on the way to meeting the NQS.